the way people have bred crops and so on. But of course, evolution in nature is nothing like that. It exists in a very complex system of chemicals, physical properties and so on. And I guess by studying ecosystems as being a source of creativity, because nature is of course a big source of creativity, I think the idea of looking at these systems and abstracting them is a really interesting way of thinking about how we can make creative systems that people can use. It's not about emulating human creativity, obviously. It's much more a question of creativity in general. What kinds of creative systems are we familiar with? Well, obviously human creativity, but also natural creativity that we find in the incredible diversity of species on Earth. So I guess in more recent times I started to think about how you conceptualize the computer and the role of a person interacting with that computer. So traditionally we mimicked our tools. In the earliest days of computer software that was designed for creative purposes, we had the idea of a computer being a tool. So if you think about something like Adobe Photoshop, that originally was supposed to mimic a photographer's darkroom, for example. So it was really the tools that the photographer used to have in the physical world were transplanted into the virtual world. But I think there's a much more interesting relationship that you can have where you consider a whole set of feedback possibilities between the machine and the person using the machine. And particularly now, as things like sensors are becoming much more higher in their fidelity, and we have cameras with very high resolution and sensors that are able to really start to get to a point where they're matching or exceeding human acuity in what they can measure. And also that the environment itself is an incredible source of serendipity, events, noise, and so on, that actually determine much about a creative process. So the rich long work that I showed you earlier about the line made by walking, what determined that he got out of the train at that particular time and decided to walk in a straight line was a lot to do with the environment that he was in. So again, this work is quite old, but it started me thinking about these ideas. That was to create a very simple computer-based ecosystem and see if that ecosystem could do things that were creative that I hadn't programmed in. So this is the very earliest version. It's quite simple. It just consists of three kinds of material. Agents with a learning system, a biomass that they can consume to get energy, and obstacles that they can't pass so they can take shelter behind, for instance. It also simulates seasons, so food grows more plentifully in the summer, and in the winter it stops growing. I'll just explain very quickly about how each individual agent works, because it'll become important when I talk about the behaviours that follow. So it's a very simple agent-based structure. There's nothing particularly interesting about it. It has a series of sensors that detect things in the environment, the colour of the environment in front of it, the nutritional value. Importantly, it listens to sound as well, how much energy the creature has, if it's in pain, what it can smell, and it can perform certain actions like rest, move around, play a particular sound, eat, mate, all those sorts of things. That's connected to the environment. I used a learning classifier system that has an evolutionary component to it. So essentially what happens is that over time the creatures become better adapted to their environment. And this is the sort of standard fodder of any artificial life simulation when people are studying evolutionary biology in computers, for example. But what I did was to take this idea and try and work out how it could work in a real environment as well. So the first thing was to actually construct the environment in physical form where it could be projected, where people could walk around it. I filled the space with a fog machine because that was just kind of cool. And importantly, I also put a camera in there, an infrared camera that could detect the presence and movement of people within the space. And the purpose for doing this was that the location of the person and the time that they spend interacting with the work was fed back into the virtual system to produce food for the creatures. So the idea being that if you're interested in the work, the creatures would get more food, they live, survive, and reproduce, and by attracting people into the space, they could basically keep people there for longer, increase their own energy and chances of survival.